Very excited this evening to begin a 3-session series of Jewish stories facilitated by Gail Lipsitz in loving memory of Gail's friend and ours, Rachel Glazer. For those of you who have studied with Gail previously, I'm sure that you will agree that we are in for a treat. Gail teaches literature classes for adults at Bethel Congregation and the Edward A. Meyerberg Center. She has a Master of Arts in Teaching English degree from Yale University and previously taught high school and college students in the US and in France. Gail was coordinator of marketing and community relations at Jewish Community Services in Baltimore for 27 years, and she's the author of Practical Parenting, A Jewish Perspective. And now it is my pleasure to turn things over to Gail. Thank you.
Gail, you're on mute.
Good start. Thank you. Thank you, Sandra. And I want to thank Cindy Goldstein for inviting me, to both of you for inviting me to do this series in memory of Rachel. It is wonderful to see so many friends coming out to discuss literature to honor Rachel's memory. As you all know, she was an amazing educator and person, and I really am honored to have been asked to do this. So you know from the communications that we'll be having 3 sessions and 3 different authors, each quite different from the others, because I wanted to give you a variety. Let's do a sound check. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, very good. Great. What I'm going to do is give a little introduction to the story, some background, and then I'll sort of do a guided discussion through the story. And I do want to know what you thought of it, but I'm going to wait until a little later, give you a chance to say, I liked it, I loved it, I hated it, whatever you want to say and why. But I do want to start with an introduction. And just for a few, no, Alan, there will not be an exam at the end. This is why I love teaching adults. No exams, no grades, just for the love of talking about literature. But I will ask while I'm doing the introduction, if you can keep yourselves on mute. We all know the ropes about that, just in case there are any dogs barking or phones ringing. And then when you want to say something, you can either raise your hand, wave, or you can use your digital hand. But if you have a white background, I might not see it. So if I don't call on you, you might have to wave as well if I don't recognize, if I don't see the digital hand right away. Okay, so our story tonight is Potatoes by Tova Mervis. She's a very well-known and much celebrated author. You have a short bio of her at the beginning of the story, which I want to update because I took this story from a collection that was published in 2010. Since 2010, Tova Mervis wrote another novel called Visible City, which was published in 2014, and a memoir, The Book of Separation, published in 2017. She also is now divorced. So she still has 3 children, but she is divorced. So I'm just bringing that bio up to date. And what's remarkable about her for our purposes in this story is that she grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, which, by the way, is where my grandmother, my father's mother, went when she came at age 16 from Lithuania. She had family already there. And so I have family in Memphis, which is kind of cool for the background of this story. The story is about an immigrant family but it reflects the stories of thousands of immigrant families at the same time in history and continuing until today. So I think it really resonates for us because there is so much immigration and movement going on in the world today, and we'll get to that, to those contemporary parallels if you do want to talk about them. To me, the story illustrates the power of literature about individual people that we can relate to versus statistics. For example, between 1881 and 1924, over 2.5 million East European Jews emigrated to the USA. They were fleeing persecution and economic hardship. They were seeking economic opportunity and a better life for themselves and their families. And probably many of you are, you carry with you the stories of your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents who did that, who emigrated for those kinds of reasons. This period of mass immigration, which lasted from 1881 to 1924, ended with the passage of restrictive laws in the United States in 1921 and 1924. You probably already know that. So, how do we wrap our minds around numbers like 2.5 million immigrants? I think that this story, Tova Mervis's story about Bella and her family, puts a human face on what Emma Lazarus wrote in her poem that's on the Statue of Liberty, the huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Those huddled masses, from those huddled masses, Tova Mervis has selected one family to tell us the story about, and through their lens, through that experience, we can extrapolate many similar stories. The story is set, well, really in two places. The time is the turn of the century, between the 1890s and the early 1900s. No exact date is given, but we can figure out from the history of immigration that I was just telling you that that's about when it takes place. And the family has moved from Grodno in Belarus to Memphis, Tennessee. So I want to locate Grodno for you. It's today a city in Western Belarus, located on the Dnieper River. It's 186 miles from Minsk, 9 miles from the Polish border, and 19 miles from Lithuania. Before the Holocaust, according to the Russian census of 1897, Jews constituted 48% of the total population of Grodno, the total population being 46,900 people. Just think about that. Almost half the people there were Jews. But we know what happened to so many of them in World War II. They were deported to extermination camps, and that was the terrible fate of most of the Jews of Grodno. It was part of Lithuania, which was part of Russia, from 1795 to 1919. Poland took it in 1919, from 1919 to 1921. And I'm just stressing this because, as you know from your East European history, territories passed from one power to another back and forth, almost like, tossing a ball back and forth. And this was very unsettling for the people who lived there. Anyway, at the end of the Polish-Soviet War in 1921, in the Peace Treaty of Riga, Grodno was adjudicated to Poland. So it's pretty safe to say that our family, Bella's family, came from this city and knew of this background, had experienced it themselves. And Tova Mervis's great-grandmother, in fact, were from Grodno. So this is a part of her family history. So they come to Memphis, and at the beginning of the story, the family has been there for 5 months, and they're living in what was called the Pinch district of Memphis. This is really the name that was given to this specific district. So I'm going to tell you that's the second setting, and it's really where the story opens. It's a historic district of downtown Memphis, and it was part of the original plan for the city, emerged as the city's first commercial area. Market Street, which is mentioned in the story, was the main street there. And the name Pinch was originally a derisive term referring to the Irish immigrants who were emaciated because they were fleeing the Great Famine in the 1840s. And another name for it was Pinch Gut, because the residents were starving. It was home to the earliest immigrant communities in Memphis, mainly Irish, Italian, Russian, Greek, and Jewish. And from the 1890s to the 1930s, the Pinch was the center of Memphis's Jewish community with many synagogues and Jewish-owned businesses. There's another writer, American writer named Steve Stern, great writer. I highly recommend him. And his family was from the Pinch in Memphis, and he writes a lot of stories, as does Tova Mervis, that take place there. Okay, so that's the background as far as the setting goes. And the story really focuses, our story focuses on one member of the family mainly, and that's Bella, who I'm guessing is about 15 years old, 15, 16 years old. I deduce that because her 2 twin brothers, she's the eldest of the family's children. Her 2 twin brothers are in junior high school. So I'm figuring that she's probably about 15 years old in this story. Okay, so now I'm going to open discussion. We'll consider some questions, and please feel free to participate. So the first thing I'd like to establish is what was this family's motivation for moving from Grodno to Memphis? And you learn a lot right on the first page of the story. What was it that led them to move? Anybody? Susan, yes. You have to just unmute yourself, Susan.
You could find work in America. That was the motivation of her father. There was work to be done. So that's why that spurred them to come on.
Good. And how did he know that specifically or personally?
I believe I read the story a few days ago, but I believe a relative who had already emigrated wrote back to the family and said, in effect, come, there's work here. So that was the motivation, I think.
Great. So yes, this cousin wrote, you can make a living here. Right. And so like most of the immigrants at that time, they were looking for a better style of life. And you know that they were not well-to-do. Potatoes figure throughout the story, but there's the scene back in Grodno where Bella and her youngest brother are out digging potatoes, and this is a staple of their diet. So they're hoping to do better in this country. And these cousins, they're kind of well, we never actually meet the cousins in Memphis, do we? They help the father find an apartment for the family, and then they kind of disappear from the story. They just help them get set up, and they play no other part in the story. So the family is kind of on its own. There's another motive for why they move to Memphis, or why they leave Grodno. And it's a mystery that gets revealed later in the story. There's some hints of something that happened in Grodno And there are whisperings that Bella overhears, and the father suddenly changed his mind. This is on page 18. The father had suddenly changed his mind about the need to leave Grodno, and there were hushed conversations. We're going to uncover that in a little bit, but for now, let's just put that on your back shelf, so to speak, and we'll look into that other motivator. But the primary one seems to have been, or at least just as important, was economic. So this story is not told in chronological order. It could have started out, once upon a time, there was a family living in Grodno, and they decided to emigrate for a better life. But no, it doesn't start out there. And so we'll talk in a little bit about why the certain information is withheld for a while and only comes out later. But there are a couple of flashbacks, and the structure of the story, well, how we react to it, I think, is significant. But anyway, we're in the moment. We're already in Memphis for 5 months with Bella when the story opens. So Bella is facing a lot of challenges as immigrants do, and it's very significant. There are so many. I mean, like, I filled up 2 pages of the challenges she's facing. Probably the most important one that comes up right on the first page, and this is a hugely important piece of information, is that the emigration has split up this family. And boy, have we been hearing a lot about that in this country, right? The family, do you remember what happened, how the family got split up upon arrival? Myra, you can unmute and tell us. Thank you.
The youngest brother had an eye disease, and he was turned all away, and his mother went back with him. So
Right.
he and his mother went back to Grodno.
Yes, thank you. I don't know how to pronounce his name properly. I'm guessing, I don't want to call him Shale. I'm going to call him Shal. Shali, it might be short for Shalom, or, you know, it's probably a Yiddish name, you know, like Rachala, or what were you going to say, Myra?
Saul, like Saul.
Saul.
Shaul.
Yeah, Shaul. Oh, thank you. I bet you're right. I just couldn't think what the name would have been. Saul. Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe we'll call him, well, except there's an H there. All right. I'm just going to call him Shal for now. Anyway, right. They were not allowed in at Ellis Island. And this was very abrupt. I mean, they sailed across the sea on this ship, which sounded sort of rickety, not very pleasant living conditions on that boat, and they get to Ellis Island, and it's like, no, you can't come in. And so the family, it's a very abrupt separation. I mean, just think about it. It had to have been really traumatic for everyone in the family. And so they go back, never come back during the story. We hope. There's a letter from the mother at one point saying his eye is still not healed. We can't come yet, but we hope that eventually they will get there. But for the time that we are spending in Memphis with what's left of the family, there's no mother and there's no little brother to whom Bella is the most attached of her siblings. And that's really, really important. There's a sentence on page 18 that I want to draw your attention to. Though they had left Grodno as a family, they had each arrived here alone. Now, you can't take that exactly literally, because there are 4 of them in Memphis, the father, the twin brothers, and Bella. But how do you interpret that? though they had left Grodno as a family, they had each arrived here alone. I think there's a deeper meaning to it. Mrs. Kornblatt, tell me your first name.
My first name's Anne.
Anne.
I felt like that there was a family that was not communicating well to each other. They kept their feelings inside instead of sharing it, whether it be their fear. Just imagine if your mother and baby brother have to leave right away and go back, and here the four of them are here, the two brothers, father and her. And the father is not sharing how he feels with his children, which many times years ago, fathers didn't share. They were the strong ones in the family and they held all their emotions inwardly. And so they were all just holding these emotions of fear and isolation to themselves.
Great, thank you. I think that's very perceptive. Did someone else have a hand up who wants to talk about this quote about they'd each arrived here alone? I'm looking for hands. Alan.
What I was going to say is, I don't usually read short stories, which was why this was so interesting and enjoyable, because it's a skeleton of a story where you have to fill in the blanks, several pages or chapters with one sentence, or the absence of a sentence. And we know nothing about the father. We know that the twins don't particularly like her, and they tease her, and they reneged on their plans to share their education with her, and they sort of have abandoned her. The father we know nothing about, and she is looking for connections to Grodno. So she sees people that she remembers in the faces of all these strangers, because she's trying to recreate the little village Anatevka that she left, or whatever it's called. Because she has nothing there, and she came alone, basically.
Okay, great. Let's talk about the father for a minute. This is very peculiar. The father never actually appears. There's no description of him. He never actually appears on the page, except that we're told at one point he sends Bella to the school because her twin brothers are very rebellious and they're acting up, and she has to go speak to the principal. The father doesn't speak English, neither does she, but he sends her instead. And then he drops out of the story. And this is something, maybe you can help me figure this out, because I can't figure out what the father's role is in this family, and why he doesn't appear again. Anybody have any thoughts about that? Sandra.
My assumption is that his sole focus is to work hard and support the family. And perhaps he has to raise money to send for his wife and son again to pay that passage when the time comes. And given the historical time period, that's what men did. They worked and provided a living. And the touchy-feely stuff, maybe some of them had time, but he apparently did not. Okay,
good. Because, you have to ask, where is the income coming from? What is this family living on? And so I think we have to assume that the father is working and earning some kind of money, because no one else is. Bella's not allowed to work. And so I have to say, personally, I felt puzzled by this choice of the author not to make the father more present in the story. But listening to your point of view on it, Sandra, I feel like he's hovering in the background. He's there. It doesn't ever say he went back or, got injured or anything. He's just not an important presence in the lives of the children and of the two boys and of Bella. He just seems to be taking a back seat as far as parenting goes. Susan, did you still want to say something? Please unmute.
Better? Can you hear
Yes.
me? Okay.
We hear you well.
Okay. You have to remember that this was a short story. While I'm reading it, I'm thinking to myself, this is a part of a novel that is in her mind, the author's mind. There's just so much you can fit into a short story. It makes you want to read more about these people. If she put it all out there, it wouldn't have the concise feeling that would, I think it's more interesting that she didn't tell us about the father, because really it wasn't about the father, it was Bella. And that incident, that episode that happens later on in the story, ties it a little bit more together with the suspense. And I want to read more about this family because she didn't lay it all out on the table. So I think that's why.
Excellent. You're adding on to what Alan Friedman said about, this is the framework of a story. This is like the skeleton of a longer, more involved story.
Exactly.
And the author is making choices, and she chooses to shine the spotlight on this one character, Bella. That it's really Bella's story.
That is why it's harder to write a short story than a novel.
Yeah, very, very hard. Valerie, please.
Yes.
I was just going to say that I think that because Bella relates so much to the mother, she feels like she's having to substitute for the mother who is not there, that perhaps that relationship is almost more important than anything that she could have with the father, because she feels like she's having to play the role of mother given that her mother is not there. So perhaps that centrality is more key in a way.
Great. Myra, please.
Building on what's already been said, I think it's also talking about the gender roles. The father's role, as we said, was to make money. And I mean, I myself growing up, remember parents, uncles, aunts, whatever, the first generation of Americans saying they did not know their fathers very well because they weren't home. And the daughter, Bella, her role was as a woman, the oldest daughter, she's going to take the role of the mother because that's what her role was.
Great. So one of the big thank you. One of the many challenges that Bella is facing is that she is forced into the role of being the home keeper. She resents terribly that she can't go to school. It's just assumed that she will run the home and that she will not go to school. And there's on page 17, about 3 times, there's a repetition of the phrase, if her mother were here. If her mother were here, she would be in school. If her mother were here, she wouldn't have to do all the shopping. She wouldn't have to prepare their food and wash their clothes. She wouldn't have all this housework to do, this drudgery, and she would be able to develop other parts of herself. And then most telling is the same paragraph on the bottom of page 17. If her mother were here, she would not have to remake herself constantly into the shape others needed her to be. See, she's had all these roles foisted on her that she never had before, and that really she shouldn't have to have at her age. But this happened to many people, but in many immigrant families. But this is Bella's story, and she misses her mother and her little brother terribly. And part of the problem is that the word interminability of the separation appears on page 19. She has no idea when the separation will end. And so there's this sense of isolation and some resentment, really, of what she's being denied and what she's being forced to take on, the responsibilities that she's being forced to shoulder. So then there are additional challenges that she's facing. Anybody want to speak? Well, let's talk about the brothers for a minute because someone brought that up. You know, what are her challenges with, yeah, Alan, I'd rather you raise your hand and speak because I can't keep up with the chat. And yeah, so go ahead and tell us what you were writing because I can't see it all.
Well, I really didn't want to monopolize, but what I was saying is
You're
that
not.
she writes to her mother and tries to spare her from bad news. So she's playing the mother to her own mother, which shows how deep
Yes.
she's embedded in this guilt, responsibility, and resentment kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that, it's interesting that, she doesn't take the one night a month to go to the class and try to work on her English when that would be an escape for her. And is it because she's too weighed down that she feels hopeless about it, or she's a little bit embarrassed about the feelings that she has for this young teacher, Sam, and she doesn't want to reveal herself, or she doesn't want to seem, the ugly duckling to Sam, rather than try to make a good impression, which she can't because she can't speak English to him. So she's all bound up in this inadequate feeling.
Great. Okay, so that's the biggest challenge she faces is the language. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Just staying for another moment with the brothers. Apparently back in Grudnoff, she had some authority over them, or they would listen to her. Now they're rebelling and they really treat her, as I think has already been said, they're mean to her. They tease her publicly even and humiliate her, and they do not obey her. And there's no adult to guide them. And these boys are going to really run wild if somebody doesn't take them in hand, but their big sister is not able to do so and really shouldn't have to do so. Again, is the father so busy working and keeping food on their table that he doesn't even see what's happening? That could be. But let's go to the biggest problem she faces, which Alan just brought up. Does somebody else want to say so? I don't want to miss any hands. Let's see if there's anybody else who had a hand up. Okay, so her biggest challenge, with piled on top of all these others, and we see it right away on the first page of the story, is that she doesn't understand or speak English. Her native language is Yiddish, and this is a huge problem. As it is, let me just ask you, all of you, if you've ever been to a country for any length of time where you didn't speak the language. How did that go for you? Anybody want to speak to that?
I'll jump in and say it actually made me think about when I lived in Israel. I was 18, and you're taking Opan and you're learning, but it's taking that step and starting to start speaking what that as you're learning. And it's hard, and it's like it's embarrassing because you're making mistakes, you're awkward, like I really felt that from the way she described Bella's experience, it's like it brought that back to me, which I hadn't thought about for a very long time. It's for some people it's just easy and they do it, and for others who are a little more shy, it can take a lot to put yourself out there. It's a vulnerability.
Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly right. You're vulnerable. And, if you're a tourist and you have a guide or an interpreter who can translate for you, that's great. But if you want to go out and do something by yourself and you don't speak the language, you're really, up a tree. What if you can't read the traffic signs? What if they're in Greek or Russian? Or whatever other language it might be. You're very unmoored and you do feel vulnerable. Some people, though, do jump in with both feet and try to learn a language, and the natives will sometimes welcome that, and sometimes they will just make fun of you and say, don't even bother trying, just I speak English. Some of you probably have had that experience. Barbara, what would you like to say?
I have the same experience. My grandson is married to a Brazilian woman, and her mother comes to, she's now staying with her for 6 months, and we cannot, we always, it's so frustrating not to have that language, because I can't say anything to her, and she always comes over. She doesn't speak English. I don't speak Portuguese, and it's very, very frustrating. She's here now, and it really is. I feel bad. I feel so bad. I can't communicate with her, and I'm the only one that's that's her age. So, well, no, she's much younger, but that I can't communicate with her at all. And so it's very difficult, very, very frustrating. I can imagine, anybody that's coming in. So that's, I feel that way. It's terrible.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very frustrating. Take a look at the first page of the story. I'd like you to notice that the word words in the plural appears 3 times right on the first page of the story. And that tells you that this story is a lot about language. I'm looking at the second paragraph. Market Street bustled with words, which is an interesting way. It's Friday afternoon. You would think it would say something like Market Street bustled with shoppers, or people running to get home to make Shabbos or whatever. No, it's bustling with words. And she can recognize the ones in Yiddish, but the rest were locked away as foreign as every face would be, etc. I'm going to come back to that sentence. And then in the last paragraph, words, you can make a living here. In the letter from the cousin, words they'd heaped so much expectation upon, it was a wonder they had not sunk. Words they'd traveled upon. So that's another dimension of words. But for Bella, the challenge is that she doesn't understand any of these words except the ones that she's hearing in Yiddish. And to complicate it, her reaction is that her tongue is paralyzed. Look on page 14. As Beth was describing before, her hesitation to even try, to say something it's a huge impediment to her. She is besieged with a malevolent shyness on page 15. Page 16, I'm just reading some passages that bring home this idea. If only she could free her tongue, she would be more bold. She's afraid to call attention to herself. She's afraid of making mistakes. These are huge barriers to her speaking English. However, she does start going to the English classes. And why does she stop? I think I think Alan, you touched on it a little bit. It seems to have a lot to do with her reaction to the teacher, to Sam. Yeah, Anne, you want to speak to that?
Yeah.
She's infatuated with him. She sees him, she admires him because he speaks beautifully. And in my mind, she's a young girl that's really finds this infatuation with a little older young man also. And he looks at her and she feels something. And she has kept, I think, her feelings inside her body the whole time she's there. So she's feeling something, a rumbling. And I think she's afraid of what she might feel.
Okay, so there is something of note that comes up on page 16 where it talks about how she used to go to English lessons, and that is that she at home privately practices English in front of the mirror. Let's not forget that, because she's doing her homework only privately. She can't do it publicly. She's too embarrassed. She's too self-conscious, but she is learning English, and that's going to be really important for the way the story ends, and for her future course in life as a new American. Okay, so there is this language, and here this language problem. On page 13, the first page of the story, we have the sentence, Bella's mind has invented a way to lessen the shock of being in a strange city. And what is that way that she has found? Someone's already alluded to it. Go to the first sentence of the story. Everyone who passed, Bella had seen before, right? Everyone who
I have the
passed.
lids, I don't have the pots.
I'm sorry, I can't see who's speaking. Somebody speaking to this point?
That when she thinks of people as other people?
Yes.
Is that, okay.
Yes. She keeps thinking that she has seen these people before, the people that she's passing on the street. Where has she seen them before? In Memphis?
The butcher,
In Grudno.
different characters from where she lived at home.
That's right. They are the people, they're her family. She keeps repeatedly sees her little brother, and people that she knew back in Grudno. So the butcher, for example, the man delivering newspapers in Memphis was the butcher from back home. Every young woman she caught sight of was her next door neighbor's daughter. And now just ahead, the 8-year-old boy was her youngest brother, and so on. So she has invented a way of feeling familiar and comfortable in this strange new environment. Now, I want to tell you, that Bella asks herself a question right on the first page 13. She's thinking about the other immigrants in the pinch in this neighborhood, Irish and Italian. She wonders if, despite their best efforts, they too still lived in the countries they had left behind. Did the faces, the houses, the streets live fully formed inside their heads? Okay, right here, this is the immigrant experience. You have one foot in each country, your old country and your new country. You are always going to have one foot in each country. One part of you is still living back there, even if you are in a new place. You can't get it out of yourself. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not implying that that's a bad thing. But what she has done is, it's described on page 14 as a rampant misconfiguration where everyone was at the same time someone else. They're doubles. The people are almost doubles. And the word misconfiguration is kind of powerful. So I spoke to a friend of mine who's a psychiatric social worker, and I asked her Bella's question. I said, is this some sort of syndrome or diagnosable behavior where a person thinks she sees someone she knows and it's a stranger? And this is what I learned. I'm passing this on to you because I didn't know about this. There's something in psychology called conversion disorder. I don't know if any of you ever heard of it, but I had not. And conversion disorder manifests in various symptoms. They might be somatic, so bodily symptoms. It could be that a person would stop talking or not be able to see clearly, or even hallucinate, or have delusions, and it is caused by trauma. trauma causes people to mistake others, to superimpose someone they knew, in this case, on a complete stranger. And it's a coping strategy, but it's a problem. And Freud identified it. He called it hysteria, and he ascribed it to women primarily. We've progressed beyond Freud somewhat. I think that, not his definition of hysteria, but this happens, as my friend explained to me, if a person does not have a way to process a painful experience. If there's no healthy way to process a painful experience or a trauma, it can cause this conversion disorder. Now, you can read this story without knowing this whole scientific bit, but I just thought it was very interesting that it exists, and whether Tova Mervis knew it or, knew what to call it, she's describing something real that does happen to people. And so this is Bella, who's been uprooted from her native land, transported to a foreign land. She's uprooted from her family. She's feeling isolation and loneliness. There's no one there to guide her. But she has also suffered trauma. So let's get to that part of the story, which only later is coming out. And the clue to the trauma is her boots. Remember her boots?
Yeah.
Okay. So she lost her boots in Grodno one time when she and Shal went to dig potatoes. But we only find out later on in the story how she lost her boots. So what happened to her? We're kept in suspense. We don't know, but this was a real trauma. Anybody want to speak to that? It's not exactly spelled out, but it's pretty clear what happened to her. Alan, please unmute yourself. Still muted, Alan.
If anybody remembers the series MASH with Alan Arkin, there's a famous episode where he's had a breakdown and he's talking with a psychiatrist, and he talks about how they were hiding from the North Koreans. And there was a woman on this bus, they were hiding with a chicken, and she couldn't make the chicken stop squawking. So finally she strangled the chicken, and the psychiatrist is saying, well, why were you upset about forcing her to strangle a chicken? And of course it wasn't a chicken, it was her baby. So she strangled her own baby to keep from the North Koreans for finding her. So this business about losing, it wasn't her boots that she was really upset about. She was sort of transferring this concept. It was that sounds like she was attacked and sexually molested. And not only that, but as horrible as I was, that there was her kid brother there who from a distance sees what's going on. So this was a hugely traumatic, and her mother had told her, let's just move on from here. Let's not think about that. And
right,
so she
bury
was
it.
repressed even further. Don't even think about this horrible thing that happened to you, and so this is and the potato business was a very joyous experience. She was so excited they were going to dig up some potatoes that they were singing, and she took off her boots, they wouldn't get messy. This was like, going on a picnic to the harbor or something for her. And this horrible thing happened, which she has suppressed, until the end of the story.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment on this? Who was, I think it's not spelled out. My sense is that she was raped. And it does say on page 21, there was an assault on her body and her soul, both.
Something inside her.
Yeah, assault on her body and soul. So yeah, that was horribly traumatic, and what it did was engender terrible fear. And she feels all her life subsequently that she's being chased by someone. She can hear the footsteps in her mind of the running of these two boys who attacked her. They were strangers. villagers. We don't really find out much about them, but they knew that they had a victim that they could grab. And, what made it so much worse for her, as you said, is that her younger brother witnessed it and that the mother told her, turn the page, never talk about it. And so that's a great recipe for a long lasting trauma. And it's, pretty sobering moment in the story. Anybody else want to comment on that? Somebody said before you really felt for her. And, I think at the moment that this secret trauma comes out, you really do feel. Yes, Anne, please.
I was going to say, I also feel that she felt guilty because her younger brother witnessed that. And that's why they had this close relationship. They shared that secret. They may not have talked about it, but he was there with her. And you think about people who are traumatized in today's world, and you want them to share and get it out of their system so they don't hold everything in. So this was, people didn't talk about the war then either. And grandparents didn't share necessarily their bad stories of what happened to them. So her mother may have been trying to protect her. Don't talk about it. You'll feel better if you keep it in. I mean, we don't know.
Yeah, thank you. Sandra.
This is more of a question. Does anyone think it's possible that the timing of their immigration had to do with the rape, that they decided that, they would move to keep that a secret, that they would, immigrate to America? I don't know if it's, they were planning it all along. It doesn't really say, but just a thought that occurred to me.
I wondered that too, Sandra. Or if it was that they were vulnerable to attacks in where they were living, were these outsiders, were these people coming in, to do pogroms and to attack women. So that's a possibility too. Something else that just dawned on me too, isn't it interesting that the brother who watched and witnessed the attack on his sister has an eye disease? Just sort of, it just sort of hit me, like, of all the things that he could have medically, is that significant? I mean, that was something that happened a lot from, the hard traveling and everything, but it just sort of spoke to me as we were talking about, well, he witnessed it. It was like, oh yeah. So.
Well, thank you, Beth. I didn't think of that. And, it's on some level, you feel like you connect the dots. Sandra, there is an answer to your question on page 18, about halfway down. Bella's been talking with Sam when her brothers are being mean to her, and Sam is taking her side and telling them, bug off, basically. And it mentions her shame. She feels shame in this case because her brothers are being so disrespectful to her, but suddenly a rare moment of pity for them, for her twin brothers. What did they know? Do you see where I am? It's the second to the last paragraph on page 18. What did they know of why their father had suddenly changed his mind about the need to leave Grodno? What hushed conversations had they overheard in their own beds? Even though they as twins were inseparable, what burdens did they now bear? It was not just she who suffered the fact that though they left Grodno as a family, they had each arrived here alone. I think that is a pretty broad hint, a pretty definite hint that this incident of her being sexually assaulted was the final push, that probably the family was thinking of moving for economic reasons, but this has become a dangerous place. And it's ironic, on the top of page 19, she fell prey to the thought that perhaps it had been better in Grodno. But to give in to this thought would open an abyss beneath her. She remembered the Grodno in which she'd known where to walk and how to talk, a city in which she and Shal had confidently set out that time when she took him to dig for potatoes. As someone was saying, it started out as an innocent diversion or, activity they were going to do together, and it turned very sinister and very sour. And so, the father felt, I think, there's an argument to be made that he felt the family was not safe and he needed to get them out of there. It doesn't say it was anti-Semitism. I think we can pretty much take it for granted that the boys who attacked her weren't Jewish, but in any case, it happened, and that was like the extra push, I would say, that made them leave. Okay, we need to talk about Sam. We started talking about him a little bit, but he's the other character who plays a pretty dominant role in the story. There's a relationship, a kind of budding relationship between him and Bella. What was your impression of him as a person? What transpires between him and Bella in the story? Any thoughts that you have about this character? Remember that he grew up in Memphis. He spoke English fluently, his parents as well, but he had learned Yiddish from his grandparents. So he knows some Yiddish, but he's very Americanized and on his way professionally. He has goals, he's well educated. All the girls are interested in him because he has a future with a capital F. What thoughts about him as a character? Looking to see if there are any hands. How does he respond to Bella, for example, at the dance, when he invites her to dance and she doesn't even understand that word, but she does agree to dance with him. How does he understand her hesitation in speaking? What's his reaction to that? How does he treat her?
I think fine. Seems to me that he's
Fine,
being-
you said?
Yeah,
Mhm. Well,
I
he
don't
certainly
think-
doesn't make fun of her, right?
yeah.
He wants-
right, exactly.
He wants to know, why did she stop coming to class? And he says, we need you.
Yeah, right.
Alan?
He treats her with all the kindness and consideration that she hasn't found in America. Like he's the link to the America that she would hope to one day be in. So, and he's very gentle in the way he does this little conversation tete-a-tete with her about, well, you can smile, and then he gesticulates what a smile is. He's trying to get to trick her into speaking. And when he says,
Right.
We need you in this class, well, they don't really need her in this class. The other people there could care less about her being in the class. But for some reason, he needs her in the class. Now, maybe he's saying that he wants her to feel that she's needed, because she doesn't feel needed except in her life of drudgery. But whether he's flirting with her at this stage or just trying to use the obvious flirtation staging to draw her out a little bit, he's maybe going to be a psychiatrist when he grows up, or a social worker, is what I think is maybe what his profession will be.
And he actually touches her, he wants to make her smile, so he very gently touches her. You're right, it's the first kind person she's met, and there's definitely an attraction between them. If you look on page 16,
Yeah.
she had not imagined it. His interest wasn't one more thing her mind had conjured up. Really important sentence. She's been conjuring up a lot of people, right? And this guy is real. She gave him a shy, quick glance. I'm on the bottom of page 16. She looked away, then met his eyes and smiled. If he could speak the silent language of her face, he would know that it was an invitation to pursue her. He was as surprised by the sweetness of the gesture as she. Was this a brief appearance of her former self, peeking out? If only she could free her tongue, she would be far more bold. Did he see an inkling of who she used to be? Because she's lost who she used to be. No one sees her as she used to be. She used to love to dance. She had, she felt she was feminine. She was pretty. She had a zest for life, and that's gone. But he sees it. And so here's a new language, the language of her face. I think that's very touching, just her expression. You don't need Yiddish, you don't need English, you don't need any other language, just the language of her face, which he can read. And that's very sweet, I think. Maybe you thought it was like a little too sweet, but I thought it was controlled by the author well, and, a hint of attraction between them. All right, so now we're going to go to the last scene, because her brothers, Bella's brothers, see something happening between Sam and Bella. And so they invite him home to dinner without telling her, except at the last minute. Panic, right? She has nothing to serve. She's going to make potato soup. There's no potatoes. And so she runs out. It's Friday night. The stores are already closed in this Jewish neighborhood. She's frantic. What can she, and she feels like her brothers deliberately are setting her up to be humiliated. And so she runs out in a panic. And what happens as she's running from store to store, she loses her way, right? She runs out of the neighborhood. And this is where her memories pursue her, and the fear of being chased pursues her. And she's really, her trauma is coming out. It's described. I'm not going to take the time to read that part, but you read it, and it's, she's in a dark park and she's terrified. And someone is calling her name, and she thinks, she's reliving the trauma of being chased by those boys back in the old country. So she finds this store, and it's open, and the store owner is kind. That's the second kind person she's met, right? Lets her in, gives her a glass of water. And how would you describe the rest of the story, the scene that unfolds? Can you, could you visualize it? Did you feel like it was, like you were there, like it was well done? What happens here on the last page? What's kartoffel? The word she keeps repeating.
Potato.
Potato in Yiddish, right?
Potato. It's like
Yeah, Regina.
it's like the floodgates opened, and she
Oh.
speaks English, and it's like she's liberated. She speaks a word in English, and so I was going to say earlier that this resonates with me so much, because when we came to this country, I went to school and I sat in class for 3 whole months, and I said nothing. And the teachers knew that I was an immigrant and I didn't speak English, and they didn't call on me. And I was fine with that. I wanted to blend in with the woodwork. And it was when the semester ended, and it was junior high school, and we had new teachers who didn't know me. And a teacher called on me for something, and I had to answer. And it's like the floodgates opened, and I said my first thing in English in class, and I was scared to death, but I said it. And
how did you feel at that moment?
I was scared. I was nervous. But it came out, and I could understand what they were saying, but I never spoke. And this language is a big thing, is a major thing. And I remember when Rachel came home from school the first day when she went to school, how frustrated she was that she couldn't speak. So this story really hit home.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Regina. It's, that's really helpful to hear a personal perspective. Just look at how skillfully this moment is described by Tova Mervis. The person who's chasing her, it turns out to be Sam. Step back 1 minute. How did Sam find her? How does he show up in this moment? What do you think happened? Because it's not spelled out. As somebody was saying before, you have to fill in the blanks because it's a short story. How did Sam suddenly appear on the scene? And it's really Sam. It's not a figure of her imagination. What do you think happened when he was invited by the brothers to dinner? What do you think happened? Did he go to the house? I mean, I think we have to assume somehow he found out that Bella had run out of the house. And I'm assuming that the brothers said something to him. Maybe not, maybe he just figured it out for himself, but I'm thinking they had to have said, oh, she went shopping, she had to go shopping to get something for dinner. And so he starts following her through the streets, and luckily he catches up with her and he finds her. And it says his face had not been concocted in her mind. It was not one born of the past, but one that lived here. It was Sam, who was supposed to be sitting down now at her family's table. Somewhere inside the thicket in her head, where she knew more than she had allowed herself to believe, she pulled out an English word. She opened her mouth, which formed a small, solid object. Potato, she said. I just think that idea of the object being the word is the object. And it's like you can visualize a little potato popping out of her mouth. That's kind of the way it is. She's connecting the thing to the name for the thing. That's what language is. That's what language does. And then she keeps saying it again, because as Regina said, the floodgate has opened, the floodgate has burst. Now the words that she actually knows are going to come out. Only once the shopkeeper went to get what she requested would she meet Sam's beseeching gaze. Bella turned to him and began to speak. It's magical. I don't know. What did you think? I shouldn't have said anything.
Yeah, Gail, I read this before I went to bed all night long. Potato, potato, potato. Yeah, it struck me because that was like the best word she could come up with. And I loved that ending. I thought it was fun. It was funny, but it wasn't funny. I really enjoyed it. And I kept saying potato, potato.
Potato, potato, tomato, tomato. Anne, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say Sam was like her knight in shining armor. He's going to be there to rescue her. He's this insecure little hurt young lady is going to blossom. That's in my mind. That's what I want to happen. That she's, if there's like a hope that she will be at peace and she won't feel this guilt that she's had for such a long time. And he saw in her something.
And they lived happily.
And they lived happily ever after.
What did Howard say?
And they lived happily ever after.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you, what do you think will happen next? You feel like Sam and Bella have a future. Anybody
Kids will go to Beth
else?
to Phila.
What?
Their kids will go to Beth to Phila.
Or Krieger Schechter.
I think what happens at the end is that, she has these crises are accelerating. She's basically about to have a psychological ECT. She's in a fright about the meal. She's feels humiliated because when Sam shows up and she has a dirty little apartment with not just plain water in the pot. And then she goes off the deep end. She gets completely out of her comfort zone. She starts to imagine that the two rapists from Grubno are after her. And she bursts in hysterical, and all this repression of her that she hasn't been allowed to express herself. She just has this, like people have a lump in their throat. She does in the shape of a potato. And so she spits out the allegorical potato in her throat, and now she can speak, and Sam is right there very conveniently. So she has exorcised these demons enough that now she could start to speak. And it's like this big climax, I think as the Kornblatts were saying, and it gets to this real epiphany. That's really what happens at the end.
Yeah, it's a very psychologically sound story, I think, from what I know and have learned of psychology. Something happened today that I want to share with you. I've been taking a course more than 2 years with an instructor in Israel named Rachel Korazim. She does Hebrew poetry online. She has hundreds of followers, and twice a week she does with us Hebrew poetry. We read the poems in Hebrew and then in translation, and sometimes we meet the authors, we meet the writers. And today, of all days, the subject was poetry about immigration. And she had two people who are now Israeli who made Aliyah from the former Soviet Union, two young poets. And they were reading their poetry and we were discussing it. And I have to read you this poem by one of them because it's so fitting for this story, and it's a great way to end our discussion. This is called In the Valley of Emigration by Clarina Priborkin. We were standing there and we were like dreamers, our eyes squinting in the scorching sun, and we knew nothing would ever be as it was. Palm trees facing the blue of the sea. The cirrus clouds commanded, "Speak Hebrew." We split our tongues. We buckled down. We pulled the trigger. The splinters of our identity scattered on the concrete pavement that we had to sweep. Oi, tata, tata, which is Yiddish for father or God, as I understand. This is describing her experience coming from the former Soviet Union to Israel. And it's so much like what happens to Bella. Remember, she was roasting in the summer heat of Memphis. It looks so different from her home landscape. And, the clouds are commanding, speak Hebrew, or in her case, speak English. And her struggle, we split our tongues. And then we said to ourselves, we have to do this. We buckled down. It was like pulling a trigger to let something, so to expel our hesitation, as Alan was describing with the potato. And yet, when the poet talked about it, she said she always includes some Yiddish in her poetry. This was written in Hebrew. She learned the Hebrew language well enough, she has learned it, to write poetry in Hebrew, but she puts the Yiddish in to honor her past. And I just thought that was, I'm going to send the poem to you, I'll email it. And here's the another poem by her, it's only 6 lines, Threads of Identity. I created a made-up identity for myself, an identity hanging on a thread, an identity of fear of exile. It hovers there over my head, a pale, silent cloud, the shadow of a girl that used to be me. So she's reinvented herself, which is really what Bella has to do too. What parts of herself can she keep? What has to be new? And it's so much of it has to do with language. Okay, so I did want to share those with you. Any final thoughts? I don't want to keep you over time. Overall comments, did you like the story? I got the feeling some of you did, yeah. Okay, good, I'm glad. This was a pleasure for me to talk with you. And if you didn't get a chance to say something, I apologize if I didn't see your hand. Now that we know each other, we're more comfortable with each other next time. I hope everyone will feel comfortable saying something. Our stories, we have two very, very short stories by Israeli writer Edgar Keret. Next time, way different from Tova Mervis, like total contrast, but I think you'll enjoy them. Valerie, would you like to say anything to the group for next time, or are we good?
I will continue to communicate via email. For those who want to pick up the stories, we have them in the office. And we also have recorded the class if you know of anyone who wasn't able to be here and would like to watch the recording.
Thank you, Gail, for a wonderful session. I think we all enjoyed it thoroughly. And thank you, Valerie, for facilitating everything led up to this and making sure we all got the story and we all got the Zoom link, and we appreciate it very much.
Valerie is very
Thank you.
organized.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much.
Thank you,
Enjoy-
Gail.
you.
Thanks so much,
you.
Gail. This was great. I
See you
really
next
enjoyed it.
time.
See you in 2023.
Okay.
Will you be
Happy
Thank you, Gail.
Hanukkah.
It was a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
will you
Thank
be
you.
sending the next story
Wonderful.
between now and the next?
Yes, we can actually send it very soon because we actually just put it in the Divrei, but we can send it to the group so that you have it, the two stories, I think.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I
Thank you all so much.
Good night,
Thank
Sue.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Very,
Kiss
very
Sabrina for
interesting.
me. And
I
I'll
will, I will.
take care.
Regina, are
Bye,
you
everyone.
Yvonne's mother?
Bye, Sue.
No, I'm her aunt.
Oh.
Her mother is
You'll
my
need to
other
unlock your
sister.
iPhone first.
Well, my phone is talking to me.
Freaking leave.
No, Yvonne's mom is my other sister.
And Yvonne used to live next door to us
Oh, I see. I have to tell her that I met
years
you
ago in Randallstown.
Yes.
in Randall's.
Meadow-
Yes.
Meadow
right,
Heights Road.
Yeah. Right. Well, nice to meet you.
Thank you. Likewise.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye, Sandra.
Night. Thank you, Valerie.
Sure, my pleasure.